Our ship landed on Xylos under a sky the color of a soft bruise. The air was thin but sweet, filled with the scent of damp earth and strange, unseen blossoms. Below us, the settlement of Harmony was split down the middle. It was a division you could see and feel. On one side stood the human enclave, its buildings made of recycled ship plating and hard-edged plastics. They were grey and functional, built for survival. On the other side were the homes of the Ganar, the native people of Xylos. Their dwellings were woven from the living roots of the forest, curving and organic, glowing with a soft internal light. Between them ran a line of scorched earth, a scar from a conflict long past but never healed. It was a no-man's land no one dared to cross. The tension was a physical thing, like a pressure in the air. As our team walked from the landing pad, we saw the signs of this deep wound everywhere. On the metal walls of the enclave, angry words were scrawled in bright red paint. Ganar, go home. It was a strange message, since this was their home. On the Ganar side, near the edge of their forest city, intricate carvings in the bark of ancient trees depicted humans as faceless monsters with weapons instead of hands. Children from both communities would sometimes stare at each other across the divide, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear, before an adult would pull them away with a harsh word. The silence between the two sides was louder than any shout. We had come as facilitators, a small group of outsiders hoping to help mend this broken place. Our mission was one of peace, but peace felt like a distant star from where we stood. The human settlers watched us with suspicion, their eyes hard and their arms crossed. They saw us as intruders, meddling in affairs we couldn't possibly understand. The Ganar were just as wary, their large, dark eyes following our every move from the shadows of their woven homes. They had learned that outsiders often brought more pain than healing. We knew this would not be easy. We knew that listening would be our most important tool, and that we would need a lot of patience. The very landscape seemed to reflect the division. The human side of the settlement was orderly and barren, with straight lines and cleared ground. They had fought to tame the land, to make it predictable and safe. The Ganar side, in contrast, was a beautiful, chaotic tangle of nature. Their paths were winding, their homes were part of the forest, and the air hummed with the sounds of 1,000 tiny creatures. It was as if two different worlds were trying to exist on the same small patch of ground, each one refusing to acknowledge the other. Our first task was to simply stand in the middle of this quiet war and be present, to show that we were not there to take a side, but to build a bridge. Our first attempts at bringing the two communities together were a failure. We organized a formal meeting in a neutral tent set up in the scarred no-man's land. We hoped that a structured conversation would be a good start. We were wrong. Only a few people came from each side, mostly officials who were required to be there. The humans sat stiffly on one side of the tent, their faces set like stone. The Ganar sat on the other, their bodies turned slightly away as if ready to flee at any moment. The air was thick with unspoken anger and old hurts. It was a room full of people who had already decided what they thought of each other. We tried to guide the conversation with gentle questions. "Can you share what a typical day is like for you?" we asked. A human council member, a stern woman named Elara, spoke first. Her voice was clipped and cold. She talked about the hardships of living on Xylos, the constant work, the struggle to maintain their equipment. She never once looked at the Ganar. When she finished, there was a heavy silence. We then invited one of the Ganar elders, Kalen, to speak. Kalen's voice was soft, like the rustling of leaves, but it carried a deep sadness. He spoke of the forest, of the spirits of the trees, and of how the land was crying. He did not look at the humans. The conversation quickly fell apart. The humans accused the Ganar of stealing supplies and sabotaging their water purifiers. The Ganar accused the humans of poisoning the soil and scaring away the forest creatures they depended on for food. The words were like sharp stones thrown across the empty space between them. There was no listening, only blaming. Each side was speaking a different language of pain, and no one was trying to understand the other. We realized that we had made a mistake. We had tried to force a conversation before building any trust. The wounds were too deep to be healed with polite questions and formal meetings. After just an hour, the meeting ended. People left quickly, without a word or a glance. The tent felt emptier than before, filled with the ghosts of failed hopes. We, the facilitators, sat alone in the silence, feeling the weight of our failure. It was clear that talking at each other was not the answer. These communities were not ready to solve their problems because they were not yet ready to see each other as people. They were trapped in their own stories, their own pain. We knew we had to change our approach completely. We had to leave the neutral tent behind and step into their worlds, one small, careful step at a time. The path forward was not through a formal meeting, but through shared meals, quiet observation, and the simple act of being present. We decided to abandon the big meetings. Instead, we started visiting people in their homes. We broke our team into pairs and spent our days simply being with the communities. We went to the human enclave and sat in their kitchens, drinking bitter coffee and listening. At first, the conversations were guarded. They told us about their struggles, their fears for their children's future on this harsh planet. They spoke of the Ganar as a mysterious and hostile force, something to be defended against. But as we kept coming back, just to listen without judgment, they started to share more. They told us stories about Earth, the home they had left behind. They showed us pictures of green fields and blue oceans, a world their children had never seen. Then, we would cross the divide and visit the Ganar in their woven homes. We would sit on soft mossy floors and share a cup of warm sap tea. The Ganar were quiet at first. They communicated as much with gestures and the expressions in their large dark eyes as they did with words. We learned to be patient, to sit in comfortable silence. Slowly, they began to open up. They didn't talk about the conflict directly. Instead, they shared their stories, their myths about the creation of Xylos and the spirits of the forest. They showed us how they wove their homes from living roots, how they sang to the plants to help them grow. They spoke of the humans as a loud and destructive storm that had come to their peaceful forest. We found that the most powerful moments happened when we stopped trying to fix things and simply participated in their daily lives. We helped a human mechanic repair a solar panel, listening as he talked about his dream of building a school for the children. We helped a Ganar weaver gather colorful mosses, listening as she hummed a song about the changing seasons. We were no longer just facilitators. We were becoming familiar faces, people who were willing to get their hands dirty and share in the work. This simple act of sharing tasks began to build a fragile trust, a tiny thread of connection where none had existed before. The most important thing we did was carry stories back and forth. We didn't do it in a formal way. We would just share something we had learned. To a human family worried about their crops, we might say, "We were with the Ganar yesterday, and they showed us a route that helps keep the soil moist." To a Ganar elder who was sad about the silence in the forest, we might say, "We met a human musician who plays beautiful, quiet songs on a flute he carved himself." We were not trying to solve their problems for them. We were just planting tiny seeds of curiosity, showing each side a small, humanizing glimpse of the other. We were letting them hear the whispers of each other's lives on the wind. The change was slow, almost invisible at first. It was like watching a glacier move. But small things started to happen. A human child, curious about the Ganar stories we had shared, left a small painted rock near the edge of the no man's land. The next day, it was gone. And in its place was a single perfect feather of a native bird. It was a silent conversation, a tiny acknowledgement. Then, one of the human engineers, a man named Ben, who was always tinkering with gadgets, built a simple water filter based on the Ganar route we had told him about. He left it near the dividing line with a note explaining how it worked. A few days later, a Ganar youth left a basket of sweet, juicy fruits in the same spot. These small exchanges were like building a bridge one stone at a time. They were unofficial and quiet, happening away from the suspicious eyes of the elders. The young people were leading the way, driven by a curiosity that had not yet been completely hardened into hate. They were tired of the silence and the fear. We saw them watching each other more often, but now there was less hostility in their gazes. There was a question in their eyes. Are you really like they say you are? The painted rocks and baskets of fruit were their way of asking and of answering. It was a fragile and delicate piece, but it was a start. Our role shifted from being active listeners to being quiet observers. We watched as these small acts of kindness created ripples. An elderly human woman, who had been one of the most vocal critics of the Ganar, saw the basket of fruit. She remembered a similar fruit from her childhood on a different planet. The memory softened her face. She didn't say anything, but the next time she spoke of the Ganar, there was less anger in her voice. On the other side, a young Ganar, fascinated by the diagram of the water filter, began to wonder what other things the humans could build. The stereotypes were beginning to crack, just a little. We knew that this small, informal bridge was not strong enough to hold the weight of the past. It was a good sign, a reason for hope, but it was not a solution. The deep-seated mistrust was still there, like a dormant volcano waiting for a reason to erupt. The peace was fragile because it was built on gestures, not on understanding. The two communities were still not talking to each other directly. They were still strangers who shared a planet, but not a life. We knew that a real test would come, a moment that would either shatter this delicate new connection or forge it into something much stronger. We just didn't know when that moment would be. The crisis came, as it always does, without warning. A sudden blight struck the Ganar's sacred grove, the heart of their forest city. The leaves of the ancient trees turned black, and the glowing moss that lit their homes began to die. The Ganar were devastated. This grove was not just a source of food and shelter. It was their spiritual center, the place where their ancestors were remembered. Their sadness quickly turned to anger. They had seen the humans spraying chemicals on their crops a week before. The conclusion was immediate and obvious to them. The humans had poisoned their grove. The whispers of the past turned into shouts of accusation. Panic and rage swept through the Ganar community. A group of young warriors, their faces painted for battle, gathered at the edge of the scorched earth. They held sharpened spears made of hardened wood. Their grief was so great that it had become a fire, and they wanted to burn the human enclave to the ground. On the other side, the humans saw the gathering warriors, and fear took hold. They armed themselves with whatever they could find, tools, pipes, and a few old plasma rifles from their ship. The fragile peace shattered in an instant. The old hatreds came rushing back stronger than ever. All the small stones of their bridge were about to be washed away in a flood of violence. Ilara, the human council member, stood at the front of her people, her face grim. "They're blaming us," she said to us, her voice shaking with anger. "We were just trying to save our own crops from a pest. We never went near their forest." Kalen, the Ganar elder, stood with his warriors, his heart heavy. "The humans destroy everything they touch," he said, his soft voice now filled with pain. "They have killed our ancestors. There can be no peace after this." Both sides were convinced they were right. They were both trapped in their own perspective, unable to see any other possibility. The air crackled with the energy of imminent violence. Our team was caught in the middle. We ran back and forth across the no man's land, trying to plead for calm. We urged them to wait, to talk, to not let their fear and anger lead them to do something that could never be undone. But our words were lost in the roar of their rage. It felt hopeless. The years of mistrust had created a chasm so deep that no truth seemed able to cross it. The two communities stood on the brink of a war that would destroy them both, each one believing they were the victim, each one ready to become the aggressor. The sky darkened, and it felt like the whole planet was holding its breath, waiting for the first blow to fall. Just as the two sides were about to clash, one of our team members, a xenobotanist named Lena, made a discovery. She had been taking samples from the dying trees in the Ganar Grove and from the soil in the human fields. She worked frantically in our small mobile lab, ignoring the shouts and the tension outside. She knew that violence was often born from a misunderstanding, and she was looking for a different story. As the sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows, she ran out of the lab, holding a data pad. She shouted, "Wait, it's not what you think!" She ran into the space between the two armed groups, holding up her hands. Everyone stared at her. Breathing heavily, she said, "The blight in the grove, it wasn't caused by the humans' chemicals, and the pest on the human crops. It's not a pest." She projected a microscopic image from her data pad onto the side of our ship. It showed a tiny spore-like organism. Lena explained, "This is a native life form. It has a two-stage life cycle. In one stage, it feeds on the leaves of the sacred trees, causing the blight. In its other stage, it eats the roots of the humans' food crops." The two problems were not separate attacks. They were two symptoms of the same natural cycle. A deep silence fell over the crowd. The humans and the Ganar looked at the image, then at each other. The story they had been so sure of, the one that fueled their anger, was wrong. They were not enemies fighting each other. They were two victims of the same natural phenomenon. They had been so focused on blaming each other that they had failed to see the real cause of their problems. The truth was not a weapon one side could use against the other. It was a mirror, showing them both their shared vulnerability. It showed them that they were both struggling to survive on a planet they did not fully understand. Slowly, the anger began to drain away, replaced by a mixture of confusion, shame, and relief. The young Ganar warriors lowered their spears. The human settlers put down their makeshift weapons. The immediate threat of violence was gone, but the moment was heavy with the weight of what had almost happened. They had been seconds away from destroying each other over a lie they had told themselves. The truth hadn't come from a leader or a warrior, but from a quiet scientist who had chosen to look for facts instead of faults. In that moment, the real enemy was not the person standing across from them, but the ignorance that had lived inside them for so long. The near disaster opened a door. A few days later, we called for another meeting. This time, it wasn't in a neutral tent. It was held in the open air, in the space between their two worlds. And this time, almost everyone came. They didn't sit on opposite sides. They gathered in a loose circle, a mix of human and Ganar faces, all looking tired but open. The atmosphere was completely different. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet solemnity. They were ready to listen. The session began not with accusations, but with apologies. Kalin, the Ganar elder, was the first to speak. His voice was filled with a deep humility. He said, "For many years we have held on to our pain. We saw you as invaders, as a storm that brought only destruction. We blamed you for the changes to our world, for the fear we felt. We taught our children to see you as monsters. Today, I see that we were wrong. We let our fear blind us to your own struggles. We did not try to understand your story. For my part in building this wall of silence and hate, I am sorry." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a generation's worth of sorrow. When he finished, several other Ganar elders nodded in agreement, their eyes shining with tears. Then, Elara, the human council member, stood up. Her usually stern face was soft with emotion. She said, "We came here with nothing. We were running from a broken world, just looking for a safe place to call home. We were scared. We saw this land as something to be conquered, not something to be shared. We saw you, the Ganar, not as people, but as another obstacle to our survival. We let our fear make us selfish and cruel. We ignored your wisdom and your connection to this land. For the pain we have caused, for our arrogance and our ignorance, I am truly sorry." She bowed her head, a gesture of profound respect. After the elders spoke, the young people were invited to share their hopes. A young Ganar girl, who had been one of the first to leave a feather in the no man's land, spoke of her dream to learn about the stars from the humans. A teenage human boy, the son of the mechanic, spoke of his hope to learn how to weave with living roots from the Ganar. They didn't talk about the past. They talked about a future where they could learn from each other, where their two cultures could create something new and beautiful together. Their voices were full of a cautious optimism, a belief that they could write a different story than their parents had. It was a powerful moment of healing, a turning point for the two communities. Words are important, but actions make them real. After the breakthrough session, the communities decided they needed to do something together to create a physical symbol of their new beginning. They decided to transform the ugliest place in their settlement, the grey, imposing wall of the human enclave that faced the Ganar forest, into a piece of collective art. The wall that had once held hateful graffiti would now become a canvas for a shared story. The project was led by the young people, but everyone, from the oldest elder to the youngest child, was invited to take part. It was a beautiful sight to behold. Humans and Ganar worked side by side, laughing and talking as they mixed paints. The humans brought their technical skills, creating durable pigments that could withstand the harsh weather of Xylos. The Ganar brought their artistic vision, using colors and patterns inspired by the natural world around them. They decided to paint a giant mural that depicted the history and the future of their home. One side of the mural showed the Ganar's creation myths, the spirits of the forest, and the ancient trees. The other side showed the humans' journey through the stars, their silver ship, and their dreams of a new home. In the center of the mural, where the two stories met, they painted something new. They painted human children and Ganar children playing together under the bruised colored sky of Xylos. They painted humans learning to weave living structures, and Ganar learning to read the stars from a telescope. They painted the tiny spore that had almost destroyed them, but they depicted it not as a monster, but as a part of the great complex circle of life on their shared planet. The mural was a celebration of their differences and a testament to their newfound unity. It was a promise to remember the past, but not be trapped by it. As they painted, they shared more stories. A human elder told a Ganar child a fairy tale from Earth. A Ganar weaver taught a human teenager how to make a paintbrush from a special kind of grass. The wall was no longer a symbol of division, it was becoming a bridge, a place of connection and creation. The act of making something beautiful together was healing them in a way that words alone never could. It was a physical manifestation of their commitment to each other. Every brushstroke was a vote for hope, a gesture of forgiveness, and a step toward a shared future. The completion of the mural was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The two communities gathered to celebrate, not as humans and Ganar, but as people of Xylos. They stood together before the vibrant wall, a riot of color and life against the gray landscape. In front of this new symbol of unity, they signed a formal agreement. It wasn't a treaty between enemies, but a covenant between neighbors. They agreed to share the land, to protect it together, and to learn from each other. They established a joint council with members from both communities to make decisions about their shared resources. The no man's land was gone, replaced by a community garden they would all tend. The changes were visible everywhere. The hostile graffiti was a distant memory, replaced by a masterpiece of cooperation. The suspicious glances were gone, replaced by friendly nods and shared smiles. Human children could be seen sitting with Ganar elders, listening to stories of the forest. Ganar youth were often in the human workshop, learning about mechanics and engineering. They had discovered that their skills were complementary. The humans' technical knowledge could help them adapt to the planet's challenges, and the Ganar's deep understanding of the local ecosystem could help the humans live in harmony with the land, not just on it. Our work as facilitators was done. We had not given them the answers. We had simply created a space where they could find their own. We had helped them listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. We had shown them that reconciliation is not about forgetting the past, but about building a future that is stronger than the pain. It requires the courage to apologize, the grace to forgive, and the willingness to see the humanity in those you once called your enemy. It is a slow and difficult process, but as the people of Xylos proved, it is always possible. As our ship lifted off from the planet, we looked down at the settlement of Harmony one last time. From above, we could no longer see the line that had once divided it. We saw a single community, vibrant and whole. We saw the colorful murals shining in the light of the setting sun. We saw the new garden, a patch of green that connected the metal buildings and the living forest. We left Xylos with a profound sense of hope. We had witnessed how listening, storytelling, and a shared crisis could transform fear into understanding and division into a beautiful, resilient unity. The bridges they built were not made of steel or stone, but of something far stronger: shared stories and a common dream.